I've been directly involved in the launch of over a dozen multi-site campuses through the churches I've led, and half of them have been in movie theaters. I'm convinced that every church leader should consider using a theater for your next campus or church plant. They're flexible, culturally relevant locations, typically in the center of the community that you're trying to reach. Regal is the only theater company with a dedicated team of full-time consultants ready to help your church launch and succeed in a movie theater. Check out regaltheaterchurch.com for more information on locations your church could use.
Welcome to the unSeminary podcast. Are you looking for practical ministry help to drive your ministry further, faster? Have a sinking feeling that your ministry training didn't prepare you for the real world? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others in pursuit of stuff that we wish they had taught in seminary. Buckle up and let's get started with this week's unSeminary podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the unSeminary podcast. My name's Rich, the host around these parts. So glad that you've decided to tune in. We know you've got a lot going on at your church, and so we're honored that you would take some time out this week to pop us in your earbuds. And you're going to be rewarded for this. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while with Josh Canizaro from One Hope Church in New Orleans. Josh was originally joined the team at Church of the Highlands and was on their team for a while. We've had a few folks from Church of the Highlands on in the past, but then just planted this church about 2 years ago, if I'm correct. In 2014. Yeah. So, Josh, welcome to the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about One Hope and why on earth are you planting in a place like New Orleans?
Well, Rich, thanks for inviting me to the unSeminary podcast. I'm pretty excited to be with you. Something started very early age for me. I'm a pastor's son, so I grew up in and around ministry. And that didn't really draw me to ministry as a way of life. It kind of led me away from it in my teenage years. But I tell you, like many of us, you have an experience with God and you fall in love with Him. And in the process of that relationship, you realize that you got to follow the calling that He's placed in your life. And that started for me very young age. Started in ministry about 20 when I started in youth ministry, actually working with my dad a bit. And that was right outside of New Orleans. So I'm kind of born and raised right here in this city with all the craziness that happens here throughout the year. And like you mentioned earlier, I had a great opportunity after about 6 or 7 years into ministry to partner with Pastor Chris Hodges in Birmingham, Alabama with Church of the Highlands. That was back in 2004. Spent 10 years with them. And just an amazing ride from a startup church in a high school in Birmingham to just a tremendous ministry in the state of Alabama. And I don't know what happened. I'm 10 years in. I was happy, loving life, had 2 beautiful children in Birmingham. And then, there's that still small voice of God again saying, not only do you have to follow the calling of God in ministry, but you got to do it where I've called you to do it. And I started just this passion ignited again for New Orleans, just to go somewhere and to bring what was happening in Birmingham, actually bring that to a city that I didn't really see it happening the same way. There's some good churches here doing some good things, but most of them are actually in the suburbs. They're not really in the city of New Orleans. And I just started having this passion. And like many of us, our wives know ahead of us. My wife was like, I know we were going there. I was like, no, like we were in the Bible Belt. It was a good place in Birmingham. But coming home was a good thing. And so 2014, we moved back to New Orleans and started laying the groundwork for about 6 months, launched the church that fall. And so we're a little over 2 years into One Hope Church. And man, it's been a miracle ride already. God's doing some great things. We recently just added a third service in the evening to take care of people. And in a city where some people would say, hey, is God going to do something there, or can God do something? I hear so many people say, well, that's hard ground, or, or is it going to work there? And I really feel like we're privileged to be a part of something special. I actually had a buddy of mine when I was telling him we're going to plant in New Orleans say, man, why would you want to plant in Nineveh?
Wait a second. I think I've read that story.
Are you insulting?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you read the end of the book? I actually said, hey man, are you prophesying a good thing or a negative thing? And I said, because they actually repented in the end. Yes. It was a. And, I joke with our team here. I say, listen, it's either Nineveh or the whale. Right. You're either going to go where God's called you to go, or you're going to step outside of His plan. And I believe there's a lot more challenge outside of this plan. And so we're right in the middle of it. And Rich, it's been harder than I ever expected it would be. But it's also been some of the most fulfilling days of my life.
Well, why don't we jump into that and kind of pull that apart a little bit? One of the things I love to do on the podcast is to talk with church leaders like yourself, who in a lot of ways I think you're leading. You're going to help us learn in the rest of the country what it means to reach out to unchurched folks. Because I would say that the texture of your average unchurched person in New Orleans is maybe a little different than other parts of the country. So why don't we kind of pull that apart a little bit? What does it look like for you trying to reach out to unchurched people in New Orleans? What are some of the things you've done that God's used over these last few years?
Well, a couple of things. We do some things actually in our Sunday environment, which I'll touch on secondly. I think they're important to actually design your Sunday environment to be a place where unchurched people can actually understand what's happening. For so many of us, if you grew up around church or even attending, what you saw growing up is kind of your normal. You see things that way, and if you didn't have that, well, then you have no idea what normal is, and you're just walking into something like, man, they're weird. Like this is awkward. Like what is worship? And so we've answered some of those questions on Sundays, and I'll get to that a little bit more. But I really would say the number one thing that we've done that's opened the door is really just serving our community. Before we even opened the church, before we had our first Sunday service, I should say, we actually pursued the community in a big way. We pursued serving people, and we did a very bold thing, Rich. We decided that 10% of everything we raised to launch the church, before we actually had a service, we were going to give away to needs in our community. We're gonna kind of take this big step of faith, like, hey, we don't know if we're gonna be here in 6 months, but we're gonna invest to begin with. And for us, by the grace of God, turned out to be a pretty large number. Wow. Tens of thousands of dollars. We found some other ministries that we could partner with, but mostly we would do what we called Serve Saturdays. Serve Saturdays. We would just, first Saturday of every month, we would show up to a neighborhood close to where we were going to plant the church, and we would clean. We would pick up trash. We would straighten things. We wouldn't knock any doors first. We would serve for 2 or 3 hours, and then we would come back around afterwards, and when we would knock on doors, you'd be surprised how many doors opened because they said, hey, we saw you doing this, and the doors opened, and we were able to introduce ourselves. Many of them came out with water, came out with things because they saw that we were caring for them first. And I think it's one of the things that's missing in the local church.
Absolutely.
We're kind of looking for people to do something for us or to show up to a service.
To our thing.
And when you go the opposite direction, people are willing to come and see if you're willing to love them first.
Absolutely. Well, let's pull that apart. First of all, I'm helping a friend of mine who's, and by helping, it means I'm just providing some rah-rah cheerleading support, a guy that's planning a church right now. And I don't want to just skip over the fact that you gave 10% of your launch fund away. That's amazing. Like I know when you're in that mode, literally every dollar counts. You're coming down to you're amassing a pile of money, and then you're going to spend every dollar up until the day you launch. And that's incredible, and I think that is seen by your community. That's amazing. Now, how did you pick when you kind of went into a neighborhood? What went into that process when you kind of decided, hey, this is the neighborhood we're going to go to and do these Serve Saturdays? What did that look like?
Well, the Serve Saturdays for me really began to be what surrounded the area that God had opened the door for us to be in. I think sometimes when you're looking at going to a city, we all have big vision. So like, I'm going to win this city. And I always say you can't win the city if you don't actually win your neighborhood. And so I stepped back a little bit and just said, okay, God's opened a door in this particular facility for us to partner with. We partner with an elementary school in the city of New Orleans, and we pay rent to a local school that really funds their after-school programs. And so that was the door for us in order to serve in the community. And so I said, we're going to start there. That's going to be our epicenter. And they should see us more than anyone, not just on Sundays. They should see us making a difference in our neighborhood. And I think that it'll cascade out from there, that it'll build out. And so right now we're kind of laying the groundwork from expanding from 2 or 3 neighborhoods just around where we are to 10 or 12 neighborhoods in the city. And we're putting together a bit of what we're taking the small idea that's been working and broadening it so that we can reach more people by hitting more neighborhoods. So I think sometimes we complicate these things too much, Rich. All right. If God puts you standing on a particular plot of land, well, there you go.
Right. Start there.
I even have some church planters every once in a while who'll say, "Hey, I want to come to New Orleans." And I say, "Man, I'd love for you to come to New Orleans." And they say, "Well, is it okay to plant and like near you?" And I'll say, "Listen, I want you to plant anywhere you want. Give me 2 or 3 blocks so that our signs don't confuse people.
Right.
Like where to find this. And then I just need you to know that I'm going to win my neighborhood. I'm going to win. And I think starting simply there is one of the wisest things you can do.
Now, how has that continued to kind of as you, you've looked into kind of serving your community through outreach events like this? How has that continued now that you've launched? Was that just something you did, that's pre-launch activity, or has that continued?
Every single month, the first Saturday of every month for over 2 years now, we have been somewhere in the city. Showed up with we have our serve team shirts, so we're all together, and we have done. It's not a one-time thing or a two-time thing. It is the vision of our church. We actually call our volunteer team. We don't like the word volunteer so much. We call it our serve team because what we saw and what we see example with Jesus is that he didn't stand at the top of the pile and say, "Hey, get it right." Jesus climbed to the bottom of the pile. Humanity, and he pushed us all up. And so I think he was willing. So myself, I'm the lead pastor. I still show up. 2+ years into this, I'm still here on Serve Saturdays with a dirty shirt and exempling the way that I think Jesus would. And honestly, I think it's probably still the most important thing, especially in the first couple of years of your church. Statistics tell us that in the first 2 years of a church plant, your community is still learning that if you're even there. They don't even know. It takes 2 years for them to really discover where you are. And it takes four years for them to start trusting you. So with that in mind, I think we have to be as consistent and as faithful as we possibly can to the simple idea of serving.
Right. Now, what impact has it had on your, so I can see and understand the impact it's had on your community. Talk about the impact that it's had as you've tried to build a team and kind of, develop your core and really develop a group of people who are committed to One Hope as you've been out serving. How has this impacted that group?
Well, a lot of times what people see in their leadership, they emulate. I mean, we know that exampleship really works. And so what we have found is by serving people first, that it's attracted people whose hearts are not only open to what we're doing, but who really recognize that that's the way forward. And so we have a tremendous team of people. Over a third of our church right now, about 35%, are active every single month serving in some capacity, whether it's in Sunday morning services or a small group environment or one of our Serve Saturdays. We've had a great return on recruiting them, and I think it's by doing the practical thing, not just saying go there, but actually going there yourself and doing those things.
Well, and there's a group of volunteers, by people who are willing to serve, who frankly, they would be intimidated by leading a small group or, maybe taking on a kid's environment. But if you were to say to them like, hey, come out for the first Saturday every month and lead a group of people who are going to go out and do some sort of practical help in their community, they'll plug in and get connected. Which a lot of times, and sometimes those are guys, and a lot of times churches have a hard time connecting with that group. And what I found is in churches that have a really robust service culture like this, there's a swath of, again, particularly guys who are plugged in and serving, who a lot of churches are losing. They're not, and are you seeing that sort of thing at One Hope too?
Absolutely. We have a very strong contingency of young men who are passionate about being involved. And in my environment, we set up and take down church every single weekend. And so you need some people who can carry a few things. And so by having this culture, absolutely, we have a strong contingency of men. And also, I'll tell you, one of the added benefits, we live in a very diverse city. And unfortunately, there's still not many churches that are diverse. And by starting this approach, not only do we see gender diversity in that we have a lot of men getting involved and women getting involved, but the ethnic background of our church is very diverse. We have people from every economic and ethnic background serving and being a part of what we're doing. And it's because the people who are in greatest need, if they're being helped, they're going to be drawn in, and then they're going to start to serve. And then when people who have more means see this, what I call return on investment, they see what they're investing in working, it draws them in a greater way. And it really is a dream coming true that we would be a truly diverse environment and grow that way. So I think there's a lot of great byproducts of just simply saying, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. I'm not just going to preach on Sunday. I'm not going to be a good talker. I'm going to dive into this. And I'll just tell you, Rich, it's challenging because you'll see need at a level that frightens you at times. Like, this is huge. How do we fix this? There are many nights that I'm just like, Lord, how are we going to tackle these types of projects? And what I find is that God's faithful. He really is faithful to show up when we start doing our part.
Cool. Well, why don't we, I want to talk a little bit about being portable, because that, I know, although, we've had a number of portable churches on, I'd love to hear a little bit about what your setup is looking like. How are, tell me about the location you're in, and what are some of the things you've learned over the last few years that make you sustain that have you, able to stay portable and not, burning people out. What's that look like for you?
One of the great things, because of my past experience with Highlands, we launched a number of our locations portably. So had a little bit of experience there. I knew that there are certain things that make it a lot harder. And so poor planning certainly makes portable very challenging. And so when people come into an environment and they see streamlined processes, they see a good plan, they see that you invested on the front end to make this as easy as possible, you get a little more buy-in from people to be involved. When they feel like, man, what were you thinking?
Right.
It tends to create burnout.
Yeah.
One of the very practical things that we did is most church environments, they have what they call one setup and takedown team. It's like one team, and they kind of put all the eggs in that one basket, and that team tends to be the quickest to burnout, tends to be the highest turnover of people. And so one of the things that we started with here is we said, listen, every serve team, so whether it's kids, hospitality, whether it's production or worship teams, every team has a portion of their team that's dedicated to set up and take down. And so we've actually spread out the pressure. So no one, like 10 people have all the weight.
Yes. Hey, is there anything else you want to share before we jump into the lightning round?
Yeah, I would say just coming to a city that is not in a Bible Belt part of our country, coming to an unchurched city, I think just being very practical about what you do and even explaining things along the way. I mentioned earlier about really designing your Sunday services with the unchurched in mind. And that is largely just maybe after the first song walking up and saying, hey, welcome to worship, and we're going to be singing. And as we sing, it's really our worship to God. Just take a few minutes to actually explain what you're doing. Every single Sunday, I talk for about 5 minutes to people who've never been to the church before. And I just make sure that they're able to connect the dots with things that are unfamiliar to them. And I'll tell you, it goes a long way. And it also helps the church folks to buy into, like, hey, if you bring someone on a Sunday who doesn't know anything about this, we're going to treat them with respect and dignity. But we're also going to make sense of maybe why people are clapping in worship, why we're singing the way we are singing. And I just think sometimes we have to step back from our 10,000-foot view of church and ministry and just get down. My pastor used to say, got to put the cookies on the bottom shelf.
So true.
Take it down. So I would say that's one of the most practical things you can do. And so let's jump into the lightning round.
That's great. Well, what's an online resource, Josh, that you're using these days that's helping you in your ministry?
I still use a lot grow.com, and they have a resource page, which is also resources.growleader.com. And it's a free resource. It comes from the church group that I'm a part of. And so I use them a lot as far as ideas and helping to stir fresh things. And when you're preaching, one of the things about being a part of a team is great, but when you actually become the leader of a team, you're going to be preaching a whole lot more, and having fresh content and information and really vision helps a lot. And so having someone that you can look to. I also look to Life Church, open.life.church. I use them quite a bit these days. Love Pastor Craig Groeschel. Lots of practical inspiration, but then they also share everything.
Yeah, it's great. So helpful.
I mean, if you're not using it in a small church or in a new church environment, you're really trying to reinvent the wheel rather than being able to just repurpose some things. And they're very gracious. We honor them regularly, but they're very gracious to give it all away.
Absolutely. Great stuff. What's a book you've read in the last, maybe 6 months to a year that's shaped your thinking or ministry?
Well, we mentioned earlier Carrie Nieuwhoff's book. I just lost the Lasting Impact is the name. It helped to remind me of the answers that we want to provide to people who are unchurched. It's a great reminder. We actually took our entire core team, gave them the book, asked them to read it, and we had a night where we just had about a 3-hour conversation about these things that help us. So I would recommend that one. I would also, if you're a church planter, this is a little bit older book, way back when, Courageous Leadership by Pastor Bill Hybels.
Yep.
If you're a church planter or you're considering it, there's few books that I've read 2 or 3 times, and I've read Courageous Leadership many times. It challenges me. It touches something in this entrepreneurial risk taker to actually keep doing it. And so I recommend that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Both great books for sure. What's another ministry that you're looking to that inspires you? You mentioned Life.Church, but any other churches out there that inspire you these days?
Man, there are so many. I probably have 30 or 40 churches on a tab. And what I do on some days is when I'm just, you're prayerfully looking for good ideas, or you see something that you're going to stir, and I just go tab by tab. Obviously, Hillsong is tremendous. Elevation Church, Pastor Stephen Furtick. Some of these guys are so creative. Andy Stanley. I mean, you can't go wrong. We're resourced with some of the smartest people and some of the most dynamic people in the world. I still like a little T.D. Jakes as well.
Nice.
I think it's some of my heritage here in New Orleans. So I just simply, I believe that God works through revelation and inspiration. And so when you're in the Bible a lot and you're listening to the Word of God, there are going to be moments where you're inspired. And when that happens, I'm just very diligent to write all that down and take note of it. And so I know it's a lot, but I really think you can find a lot with Google these days.
Absolutely. If you could get 15 minutes with any leader alive, who would you want to get that with, and why?
Most recently for me is Patrick Lencioni. I've been just a big fan of his for years. Or just ordered his newest book about pastoring. He's doing one that's dedicated to ministry or taking care of what he calls a parish. He comes from a Catholic heritage, which so do I. So I'm really looking forward to reading that one. But if I can get 15 minutes with him, I've got a list of questions, probably one question from every book that he's written, kind of like, hey, what would you expound on this particular idea?
Explain this a little more, explain that a little more, that kind of thing.
He's a tremendous thinker. And then when you really get into his books, the practical application, it's something you can take from the book and actually use.
Absolutely. Good stuff. I know being a lead pastor is super busy. There's a lot going on. It sounds like a lot happening at One Hope. But when you just want to kick back, relax, enjoy life a little bit, what do you do for fun?
I come from, as I mentioned earlier, a big Italian Catholic heritage. So I've got, my grandfather just went on to be with the Lord recently. 20 grandchildren, 20 great-grandchildren.
Wow, that's amazing.
And so for me, family is a big deal, whether it's, taking my son four-wheel riding or shooting, or I'm avid CrossFitter these days.
Nice.
And so I'm not really showing it off in the video here.
Nice.
But, for me, you have to have something that requires you to step away from all of the ministry focus, and you need something that kind of forces it.
Right.
And so for me, if I'm outdoors, it's hard for me to be thinking about necessarily what I'm preaching, because I'm focused on walking with my kids or playing ball with them. CrossFit does that for me as well. I have to focus on what I'm doing to survive.
Nice. So you don't drop a big tire on you or something.
Something like that. So it helps to have something that forces your thinking away, because I think that's really the enemy's biggest attack on leaders. Is that he just tries to distract us with so many overwhelmed thoughts, and is this going to work? And if I could just say, to anyone who may be listening to this podcast randomly one day, and you're in that place where you feel overwhelmed and discouraged, the Bible says in Psalms that God goes before us and he follows us, and that he places his hand of blessing upon our head. And there are many days when I felt like, is this going to work in this city? And there's still days like that. I mean, even this week where I'm like, God, is this really going to take off in a big way? And I keep reminding myself that if I will stay focused on his truth, his principles, his hand of blessing is on my head. He's going to carry us through it. And so, Rich, I focus on taking some good breaks so that I can make the long haul of this. I can make it to the end.
Oh, that's a good place to wrap it up. Josh, I really appreciate you being on the show today. If people want to get in touch with the church or with you, how can they do that? What's the best way for them to connect?
Just check out our site. It's onehopechurch.com, all spelled out, or you can check us out on any social media site at onehopenola. And so onehopechurch.com or at onehopenola on most of the social media platforms. And love for you to check us out. And if we can help in any way, if you're looking for a resource, we love to invest in other churches. Glad to.
Thanks so much, Josh. Appreciate you being on the show today.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Don't be shy. We'd love to connect. Check out unSeminary Inbox. You can sign up at unSeminary.com, and we'll send you helpful training resources every week. Plus, you'll gain immediate access to our exclusive members area with tons of resources you can use. Connect with Rich on Twitter at Rich Birch or through email, rich@unseminary.com. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode at unseminary.com. It includes links to what we talked about today and more. Leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you. Did you enjoy today's episode? Drop by iTunes and leave a review. Thanks again for tuning in to this week's unSeminary podcast. Join us next week when we'll learn more stuff we wish they taught in seminary.